want me to stand or sit? Actually, you guys should stand عشان كله هينام after a delicious meal.
We're delighted to have Archimon with us. You don't need to, I don't need to introduce him. We're very blessed to have you. We thank you for your blessing us in the service. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen.
So Buna and Tante asked me to come and talk about service, but I didn't know what to say other than maybe we should talk about the ideal servant, Buna Shurikim. And I know many of you know about him and know his life, know his story. And so I just thought we'd focus a little bit on a few things of his life that relate to the service and sort of how it can influence us as servants, Yani. Quick summary, you all know his life. He was a teacher for a few years. He was ordained for a priest. He was a priest for 20 years. That's it. And he died when he was 48. And yet, we're still talking about him. It's shocking. It's shocking that someone could do so much by the time he's 48 and only a priest for 20 years. And we'll get to why that is in a second. He said, do we truly desire to become, this is a nice quote, become saints of God, brethren of Christ, and inheritors of the kingdom of God? I recall how while I was yet a priest, yet a married priest, Metropolitan Anthony, New York, encouraged us in one of his sermons saying that if becoming a saint is not our goal, we are wasting our time coming to church. And this strikes me, because this isn't what we observe. We observe the church is a lot of things. Becoming a saint is not one of them. There's social aspects, there's even personal fulfillment aspects. There's, service is good for leadership, service is good for the kids, services. And what I want to focus about is his intensity comes from his desire to be a saint. And so the reason this is important for us as servants is sometimes we make the mistake of saying things like, I want to be a good example for the kids. I want to be a good example for my Sunday school kids. I want my Sunday school kids to see me being a good example. I want to come early to church so the kids see me and they know that their Sunday school teacher is there early. What do you think of that? It's terrible. It's terrible. How could we say, I'm going to come to church so my kids can see me? It's fake. It's not real, right? We don't come to church for anyone to see us. Okay? We come for our life with God. We come to become saints. So the service isn't, we want the kids to love the church, and we want the kids to take on after we pass, and we want the kids to, who's going to carry the light of the church, and God protects his church. The gates of hell shall never prevail against it. We're not worried about the church. We're worried about us. Right? So the service has to be an overflow from our own life. If the service is just the thing we do, then it's pointless. Right? I want you all to remember when we were children and you were in church, I want you all to remember a fake servant. Can you remember one? One who was, you could tell they're just hypocrite, faking it, bimeselo. We all can remember 1, 2, or 10 easily. We all know remember the aunts and uncles when we were kids who were like, wish kinisa, and outside they were really something else. We know them, right? And how do we know them? Because we're smart. Kids can pick up on who's fake. When you were 12, you knew who the good people were and the bad people were in the church. And they could do whatever they want. They could say whatever they wanted. You knew the difference. Right? So the kids now can do the same thing. In fact, they're better at it. So if we approach with we need to show them, you're already lost. The kids see past what you're even pretending to think you're going to influence them, and they see you, right? And so what Abu Shor Kamel brought wasn't that he was, I'm going to be a great servant, or I'm going to think. He had a life with God that was hidden. In fact, most of his life with God was hidden. Right? And this is where we need to move to. Right? When most of our life with God is at church, right? When most of our when most of our life with God is public, then we're in a dangerous place.
Thank you.
Right? It has to be like an iceberg. You all know an iceberg, right? This expression, there's just the tip of the iceberg. Most of the iceberg is underneath the water. Most of it's hidden. Right? So if we're to become, I didn't want to say it like this, if we're to become servants, then we have to have this hidden life with God. Right? That's the key. And I love this quote: if becoming a saint is not our goal, we are wasting our time coming to church. Can you be that strong? I think so. I think so. If our life is not focused on that and that alone, then everything else is, we're just running around. Right? We're doing a lot of Martha, right? Not a lot of Mary. Right? And this is very dangerous because the church is full of Martha activities. As servants, we have to be very careful that we don't get sucked into Martha. Do. Run around, then meeting, and then this. Right? The kids, basketball, okay, all that stuff, fine. What are the kids going to remember? What are they going to see? They're going to remember there was this servant who prayed. Not because they closed their eye and did something. They prayed. And I remember that person. And you all remember someone from your childhood who was a saint. And they never gave a talk at the church. Right? But you remember them and they influence you. Right? Not because they're trying to influence you. Not because they're thinking, if I'm a saint, I have a life with God. From the abundance of that life, it just kind of flows over, and that's what hits the kids. That's the only thing that hits the kids. The abundance that flows over from your own life with God. That's what they're going to sense. Anything else? I'll continue. So this is Abu Shor Kamel. You guys recognize everyone in the picture, I'm sure. Who's the kid? Who knows who the kid is?
Is that you?
No. Not that self-centered. I'm very self-centered, huh? It's our saying. Yeah, Abuna Lo is behind him. Abuna Philemon, Abuna Tunis Hanin, and that's Amba Discourse, when he was still a monk. He was one of the, so most of this group was influenced by Abu Shor Kamel. So Abu Shor Kamel came, and Abuna Tunis Hanin, and Amba Discourse, and Amba Tedros, they're all engineers here in LA, and he hit them, all of them, including Abuna Tedros Malati and Abuna Lo'a. Abu Shor Kamel came and he inflamed all of them, and they all left, became priests, monks, bishops, you name it. This was his influence. He changed so many people, right? One of his quotes: "The Holy Liturgy is the real presence of Christ in the flesh at certain times, but at the same time it is our escape from our time to live with angels around Christ, and through Christ we live eternity. The Holy Liturgy then is our window on eternity." I was just telling some people, I was listening to Abuna Lo'a on the drive over here, and he was talking about the kingdom of heaven. And he said, it's not in the future. It's not, inshallah, we're looking forward to it. He says it's right now. The kingdom of heaven is inside us. The life with God starts now. And so the Eucharist for the servant isn't just important. The Eucharist isn't important. The Eucharist is everything. The Eucharist is everything. It is our life, right? And Christ, he gives us very simple examples. Is I cut off a branch from a tree and I put it on the ground. What's going to happen to the branch? Right? And we go, it's obvious. Is it? But yet we'll cut ourselves off from the Eucharist. We'll cut ourselves off from Christ. And we won't think anything of it. So the Eucharist becomes our breath. Right? It becomes our breath in the church. All of the saints, without exception, when you read their readings, the way they talk about the Eucharist, and they could be a Coptic saint, a Russian saint, a Greek saint, a Catholic saint, without exception, they all tell you, the Eucharist is life. Right? So your approach to the Eucharist isn't like, well, I should come early so the kids see me. Right? This is my life. This is life. This is everything. This is how I become a part of Christ, a fountain. Christ says there's a fountain that wells up inside. That's what he said to the Samaritan woman. Right? You know, if you've seen a fountain, the water just keeps coming out of a fountain. Right? So the Eucharist becomes that for us. If that fountain is off, then your kids get nothing. Right? Worse, you get nothing. Right? And you're not doing this for the kids. You're not doing this for the church. Right? Every once in a while we'll say, you know, we'll tell the youth, the church needs you. No, the church doesn't need you. Right? Or sometimes we'll tell donors, the church needs your money. Or the donor will think to themselves, well, the church needs me to support it. No, the church doesn't need your money. Right? You need to give. You need to serve. You need to love. This is for you. Right? There's this very nice story about Ember Wiz, like the Ember Wiz from the 14th century. Ember Wiz was like a beggar. He sold camel on the back of his donkey, Tishi. And there's this great story. He's sitting, on the side of the road. He's like just a beggar, sitting there. And so this soldier walks by and throws him a piece of bread. He says, here you go. He felt bad for him. And he wanted to give him something. So Ember Wiz kind of looked at him, and he said, give me a handkerchief. He took a handkerchief, took some sand, and he poured it in the handkerchief, and he twisted it. And he said, open it. And the soldier opened it, and it was gold coins. And Ember Wiz told him, just so you understand that poverty for the sake of Christ is not poverty. Yeah, and what is he telling him? With the power God's given me, I can make gold out of sand. There's your money. I'm not here because I need the money, right? You didn't give me the bread because I needed it. You gave it for you, for your salvation, right? So our service has to become like that, right? Once we think, well, St. Monica is new, I really need to step in, I need to help it out, I like Abuna Buddhist, I'm going to help him. That's not why we do anything. I'm the Serapion, I'm the Misharif Min, that's not how we do anything, right? We only do it for God alone. And not for God, because God doesn't need it, right? We say in the Gregorian liturgy, you do not need my service, but I need your lordship, right? We say this every Eid. Of course, this has our sleep, and we're thinking about meat, but that's what it says. Anyway, I'm taking too long. I'm sure that's good. So this is a quote from Abuna Metta. He's also one of my favorites. He says, one of the major problems with service... I get hot.
We all know.
One of the major problems with service in the church today is that the servant wants to rejoice in his service before Christ does. So this book, Words for Our Lives, this is the first page in the first chapter of this book. I couldn't get past this page. This is the first sentence of the first page of the book. I stopped and I couldn't get past it. The servant wants to rejoice in his service before Christ does. So the servant wants to rejoice. So who's the service for? For the servant. He yearns to see a prophet before Christ sees it. He wants to enjoy the strength and gladness that return to him from his ministry and to use the incoming fruits as a stimulus for further service. We must understand, however, a basic principle of our ministry, that this ministry is not our own. Okay? We don't serve the kids. We don't serve the parents. We don't serve Abuna. We don't serve the diocese. Right? These are God's kids. And he allows us to handle them. Abuna Shor Kamel had this incident that happened. One of the Khuddam got an idol, okay, hit a kid. In Egypt this happens all the time. And so Abuna Shor Kamel went up to the Khadim and said, do you know whose kid that was? And he goes, oh, was it someone important? He goes, yeah, very important. He goes, oh, is he a doctor? Bigger. And he said, is he like Wakil? Is he Wazir? Was he, what is he? And he said, bigger. Amda, bigger. That's God's kid. They're the Messiah that you hit. And he said, Right. But look how Abuna Shor Kamel viewed the child. they're not, that even such and this is his kid, and I like that kid, I don't like this kid. The service isn't for the kids, because if it's for the kids, and the kids يطلعوا عينك, then what are you going to do? You're going to hate the kids, you're going to hate the service, and the parents who tell you كلمتين على الماشي, and it's like, the service isn't ours, right? It has to be for something bigger. This is a very famous story, I'm sure you've all heard it. Once a Christian girl was being taken to marry a Muslim man by force. You all know the story? What Abu Nushoy did after that was amazing. She came up to him and she said, I don't want to marry this guy, but my parents are pushing me to marry him because he has money and the people are poor. And she got in the car and she kind of looked at him like, please don't let this happen. Does anyone know what Abu Nushoy did? He jumped on the car. Right? He jumped on the car and the guy drove away, trying to shake Abuna off the car. So the spirit that's in Abuna is fire, right? And anything less than fire means something's off, right? Because the God that's in us, the Eucharist, the Holy Spirit that's in us, is fire. If we aren't fire on the outside, then something is quenching the fire. So we as Christians, as people, we have to figure out what is it that's stopping the fire, right? Because the nature of God in us means we are fire, on fire for each other and for the service and for the church and for God, always. So if there isn't fire on the outside, then I have to ask myself, what's going on? Something's wrong. And then I have to take steps to remove whatever it is that's stopping the fire. And this is where things like fasting comes in, right? The idea of fasting isn't I'm doing this for God so he can count the number of days, or I fast for Saint Mary so that she gives me things. No, the fast is to remove whatever is in me, there's some ego, there's some desires, and I need to kill that thing, right? I need to crucify, as Saint Paul says, crucify the flesh. Right? So, in the service, there's kind of nothing in the middle. There's either fire or cold, right? And I remember from the book of Revelation, right? The lukewarm is the one who's spit out of his mouth. You don't want to be lukewarm, right? It's either all or nothing, right? Either the fire's on or something's wrong. And I need to figure out what's wrong. Not so the service can do better, but for me, right? Because if my goal isn't to become a saint in the church, then something's wrong. That should be my goal. All we can do is dampen the spirit and get it in its way. So St. Paul says, do not quench the spirit. When you quench something, then you put water on it. So the fire is something that we put the water on. We stop the fire. So St. Isaac the Syrian, he's one of my favorite saints. He says, with the love of God, a person will draw close to a perfect love of fellow human beings. No one has ever been able to draw close to this luminous love of humanity without first having been held worthy of the wonderful and inebriating love of God. So he's basically saying you can't really get close to loving people until you love God. And the opposite is true. Right? We cannot say we love God and not love our neighbor, as the epistle to St. John says. And when you think about this, it makes perfect sense, right? I imagine if I'm, sitting here with you guys and my son is here, right, and he's, sitting there, and then, you guys would probably come up and go, oh, are you Archie's son? Hi, what's your name? Nice to meet you, right? You'd be nice to him. Why? Because you're like, well, we like Archie, and so we're going to be nice to the kid. And the kid's a brat, and the kid's, got no manners, and the kid's a little adab. But everyone's like, and everyone's just going to move right along. Why? And the kid's whatever. Why are people being nice to the kid? Because of Abuna, or because of his dad. Right? And we all have friends like this, right? Where the kid's like whatever, but we're good friends with the dad. Right? We tolerate the kid, and even though he's kind of a brat, because we're good friends with the parents, right? And in fact, we're going to love the child because of the parent. Right? And I've even said this to kids, like, if it wasn't for your dad, I'd beat you up. Right? And then I talk sometimes inappropriately. But, and so sometimes we do this with each other. Right? I love God. I hate that person. How? Who's that person's dad? You say, I love, Yani if you took my son and you started beating on my son, قدامي, I'd be like, what are you doing? And you'd be like, oh, no, we're fine. You and I, we're very close. We're great. I'm just going to beat your son for a little bit. And be like, well, now we have a problem, because if you're going to beat my son, then you and I have a problem now. But no, but it's not against you, it's against your son. Sorry, that's my son. You can't beat him, and me and you, we stay the same. Right? But yet we beat each other, we gossip about each other, we hurt one another all the time. Right? So how can we do that? How can we hurt one another and gossip about one another? And St. John Chrysostom says, we eat the flesh of each other during the fast, but we don't eat meat. So we restrain meat, but then we eat each other's flesh. How? So there is no way I can love the kids, as St. Isaac says, until I love God, and there's no way I can love God and not love the kids. Right? Because they're his son. And that's the way I have to view it. It's not Ibn such and such or Bint such and such, right? This is God's son. And my love for God is going to make me love this person and see in them the image of God, right? Just like if I love someone's dad, right? And then I see that person, I see the dad in the kid, right? Or the mom in the kid. It's the same thing. Okay. Am I boring you? I mean, I'll just kind of keep going. Okay. Let me know when I have to finish. I'll just stop. Abu Naloa says, it's so easy to talk. Most people that give sermons, you find that the talk is much greater than the life of that person. It's very true. Abu Naloa is the opposite. It was a small portion of his life. So the sermon was a small portion of his life. His hidden interior life with Christ was so much greater. The Bible was something he read to prepare a sermon. It was not something he read to prepare a sermon. It was his personal life. Right? So he's basically saying the interior life, what I said earlier, is much bigger than the part we see. He didn't read the Bible, right? And we do this all the time. We read to prepare something. We don't read for me. We don't read to become a saint. We don't read for the love of God. I do the same thing. Is a sermon, I'll go to my last bullet, is a sermon on love enough? Can you give a talk on love and all the kids in the class know that you don't have love? Now what? Now you just made it worse. Right? Or give a talk on humility, or give a talk on not being material, and you go out and you have this house and this car and you want to show your things and you want to... Is it enough? He was the biggest sermon on love, humility. His sermon were like crumbs that fell from his personal life. Right? The crumbs that fell off the table, that was the sermon. That's what kind of, it feed what was left over. Right? And so we have to kind of keep this goal clear. Abu Tedros Melty says about him, his goal was always clear. He wanted to build others, not just Christians, including Muslims, but all humans. David's story to Saul about the lamb, you all know the story when David told the story to Saul. He said, when Saul said, what are you going to do, against Goliath? And he said, a lion took my lamb and I chased it and I ripped the lamb out of its mouth. Right? And this is why the verse says, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. Right? So what's the heart? That you would chase down a lamb in the face of a lion. That has to be our feeling toward the kids. Right? I mean, we don't even want to send a text or a call or visiting. David ran down a lion, which could have easily turned on David, right? So he put his own life in great danger for the lamb. That's the heart of God. That's the fire. That's Abunam Shor Campbell jumping on a car for one girl. Imagine how irresponsible that was of him. His whole congregation said, Abuna, you could have been hurt, you could have been killed. What about the rest of us? Don't care. He was crazy. This is what the fire of God does in us, right? It makes us like this. To chase a lamb down, one lamb from a lion, to jump on a car, to chase a kid, to call him, to listen, to be there for them. When they call you at 1 in the morning, yes, Habibi, let's talk. Come on over, let's go to Starbucks. Right? This has to be our heart, right? The kids need us more than ever, and they don't need sermons. They want a sermon, they go to SoundCloud. You all know SoundCloud? It's thousands, millions of sermons. Abuna Michael made Anaphora, an app. You can, I want this Abuna on this topic, on this day. You can get a sermon on anything you want. A lot of sermons. A lot of live streams. A lot of webcasts. A lot of talking. Everyone's got plenty. Right? If you watched, you could watch Abuna Duud Lamai videos until you, from now to the end of the, the Revelation, right? So, that's not what we need. That's not what's needed. Abuna Shurkem used to say that. People have heard enough about Christ, they need to see Him. That's what the kids want. Not a well-prepared lesson, not a lot of references, fancy words, strict Orthodox faith, and we're gonna hand them the church, and we're gonna make sure that they receive from. There's no Christ in that. Where's God in that? Abuna Shurkem was always concerned about his own salvation. He rarely talked about his personal life. He and his wife, Angel lived a celibate life together. As some of you may know, he was celibate. Abuna Tedros is the same way. Abuna Tedros Hanim was the same way. There's a few priests who just lived a celibate life with their wife. His ministry was that of a true loving and caring father, brother, and friend, not just a priest performing the duties of his office. And we can apply that to servants, not just a servant performing the duties of their office. Right? So whenever you think of service as a duty, or I should do this, I should do that, I should attend, something's wrong. Something's quenching the fire. He didn't get into politics. This is important. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of Facebook. There's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of, the Holy Synod is split in Egypt. There's the Pope Shnudas versus the Abuna Mettes. There's the Protestants versus the Orthodox. Every couple of days I hear about a new controversy on Facebook, and everyone's, not that they talk to us. That's the latest one. And there's Emba such and such, Emba such and such, right? So all of these things are really silly, and you should just pay zero attention to them. Nothing. Zero. Right? If there's someone who's a heretic, alhamdulillah, there's a bishop, and the bishop is going to take care of it. That's the bishop's job. And you don't want that job. Right? So get as little involved as as you possibly can. Zero. In the church there's politics. In the diocese, there's every level there's politics. In families there's politics. Your salvation, not even the salvation of the kids, your salvation is more important than all of that. Right? I like the second bullet, although it doesn't. The saying that he could not stand was the honor of the clergy. The dignity of the clergy was in Arabic. Karamtu kahanot. He hated this saying. He used to repeat, the honor of the priesthood lies in the washing of feet. This is what Christ did. Right? And so as servants and as clergy and as all of it, this is where we have to focus. Right? Once the service becomes any kind of stature or reputation, it's not only zero, it's negative. And now you're completely lost. Right? When you have a stature in the church, now you have a really big problem. And you have to really worry about this. Because your stature should only be, I'm looking for the lowest person, the worst job, and that's the one I want to do, that nobody's watching and that nobody can see. I remember when I was a kid, I was like 17, I went to St. Mary's, Holy Virgin Mary, and I had to meet Abuna. It was a Tuesday night. And I went into the church and I saw this woman there. You know, in Egypt, the old way of Msah al-Balat, right? They take a rag, they put it in a bucket, and she would bend over, and she would wipe like this, right? She's bent over, or just hunched over, and she's wiping the floors of the church. And this woman was not a poor woman. This woman had a lot of money. And I remember seeing that, and it just stunned me. Here she is on a Tuesday night at 8 p.m., No one is supposed to be there. And she's wiping the floors. And she could afford a mop. She could do this. She didn't want to do it. There's no bigger lesson to me than that. Right? Then I, you know, and she doesn't give sermons. But you know the saints are. When some lax people try to turn the church into a hall for social activities, Abu Shor Kamil became like a lion. And he stood very firm in public, in the church, in front of everyone, and after advising them many times in secret. Again, a danger of the church is that it becomes social, right? So, unfortunately, what happens in our church is we think we can compete with the world. And that's a problem, because you can't, right? The kids want to have fun outside. Let's let them have fun here. It's not fun here. It's funner outside, right? The teens want to go and have a party, so let's have a party here. Your party is not as fun as the party outside. I can tell you that right now. You can't compete with the world on their terms. If we're trying to draw for fun and for social and we'll just have the things here, we've diluted the church. The church primarily is two things: repentance and Eucharist. That's it. That's what it is. Everything else is give or take. Take it or leave it. And if you have a church where everyone is taking the Eucharist worthily and repenting, you have fire. You have a church of fire. And everything will come out of that. But when we don't have that, we try to replace that with something else. And that's the danger. Every once in a while you drive by a street and you see a church with like a sign, bingo, Friday nights. I mean, bingo's gambling. And you win money at the end of this, right? So what has happened, and this is, some of our churches aren't too far off, but the church is deteriorated. We can get people in the door, so what are we going to do? Every once in a while you read in the Bible, it'll say, Christ was in a room and there was a lot of people. And you're like, why is that? Because wherever Christ is, people are attracted. Right? Wherever they see God, people are hungry for God. Very hungry. They want to see Christ. They want to see Him, not hear about Him. Right? So if you want to fill the church, you put Christ in the middle of it. And everyone comes for that. If they come for something else and you say, well, you know, that way, then we're going to get them eventually. Yeah. It doesn't always work. And sometimes it has other effects. And sometimes it dilutes the church. Right? Because the church is where Christ is. That's where the church is. Everything else is not that. And should be viewed very, very carefully. Abu Shor Kamil was very big on this. Right? And we even see it in his disciple. Abu Allah is very similar, right, in this mindset. If it's not the Eucharist and repentance, don't need it. And you're like, Abuna, kids, yeah. Very focused. Right? We all have social stuff to do outside. You know, I have AYSO. I don't need to have soccer at church. I can put my kids in the soccer league over there. They have friends outside the church. Right? We don't need to bring the social to the church. We need to bring Christ in the church. Right? And the person that comes, and when they come, and they will come at some point, and when they find Christ, they'll come back. If they come for that reason, they'll find it. And when they're ready, they'll come for it. Anyway, said too much. This last bullet I think is nice because it kind of reminds me of Emma Serapian's mindset. He says he looked at the bell tower when they built a new church, and he wished for smaller churches. Right? So Sporting was built. It's a very big church. And Abuna wasn't too happy about how big it was. He wished that they had smaller churches. And I was just talking with Atif about this exact concept. How a nice church that's small has a very nice feel to it. Okay. He summarized his love for the little flock in these words: They are your children, Lord. Some are good, others are evil, others are wasting themselves. They all have one thing in common. They are your children. I am the servant of your children. I am a servant and have no right to insult or despise any of them. Because if I do, I would be insulting you or despising you. See how directly he makes that connection? Similar to what I was saying about my son. If you insult my son, then you have to be prepared that Mark's going to hear about it, right? And then I'm going to come and say, why'd you insult my son? Why'd you slap my son? Why'd you gossip about my son? Right? And as soon as someone takes a shot at Abuna's kid, everyone knows, you just took a shot at Abuna's kid. Something's going to happen.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Maybe in the metropolitan area. You take a shot at the president's child, the mayor's child, the governor's child, the chief of police, anyone with power. And he says, I have no right to insult or despise any of them, because if I do, I would be insulting you or despising you. I can only serve them, love them, and assure them of your certain promise that you love them all, because it is you who carries the sins of the world. So this idea of loving them is the only thing, by the way, they're going to remember. They're not going to remember any of your lessons. Not one. Maybe like a few things. Right? None of you remember any lessons. Everything you learned, you read when you were older. In fact, you learn most of it when you're preparing lessons. That's when you're like, wow, how come I never learned this stuff? You did. You just don't remember any of it. Right? You did. You heard all of this stuff before. And then you read it, you're like, wow, this is great. Someone should teach this. So, just like you don't remember anything from your Sunday school teachers, come on, I'll stop. I'll get something to drink. The real problem is you guys missed the food. It was very good.
We were
Sorry, I
following
have work today.
on our live stream.
Oh yeah. No, this is not a food. You didn't get food on the live stream. That's the issue.
You don't remember the food.
This you can watch on recording. Okay. Forgot what I was saying. So I can only serve them, love them, and assure them of your certain promises. So the only thing the kids are going to remember from us is our love. They're not going to remember your lesson. They're not going to remember anything else you said. Fayani, you save the time on the lesson. And it don't spend, But having said that, the time we spend in the lesson, and this is important, the time we spend in the lesson because of love is a blessing. Not because this is going to be a great lesson. The kids are going to remember this one. The other servants in the class, when they hear this lesson, they're going to remember this lesson. Right? When I invest in a lesson out of love for God, then they will benefit from that lesson, mystically. Not because I delivered it well. Okay? Every once in a while, I probably shouldn't say this, but every once in a while I'll give a talk, and someone will come up to me and say, I really liked your talk. I really liked the part about this. And honestly, I never talked about that. I'm sure this happened to you. And it's like, I never said that. In fact, the reason I know I never said that is because when you said it, it hit me like, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought of that. Right? And honestly, to me, it's like God showing me I'm the one working. That so many people in each one's getting a different talk. Each one's hearing something different. Right? And it's based on what they need to hear and their hearts. And only thing you can do is prepare with love. And then I work. Right? It's not the quality of your words or, So sometimes, even as servants, we shouldn't pray that we say the right thing. We should pray that the kids hear the right thing. Because what they hear may be different from what we say. And that's okay. In fact, can God do that? Can God make someone hear something you didn't say? Of course. Easy. Right? So our prayer shouldn't be give me the right words, but let them hear whatever they need to hear. Right? Then it's a little bit less about me, right? So it's not even, I want to give the good talk, or I want to give the good sermon, or the good whatever. I want them to just benefit from what they hear. But the important point is they're not going to remember anything you say anyway. Right? They're only going to remember your love. They'll only remember that one look you gave them when you were very angry at the retreat, right? The time you screamed, the time you judged, the time you got angry and threw something, that's what they're going to remember. Learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly of heart. That's what Christ said. The lesson of love can never be taught simply by prearranged words and anecdotes. Rather, it is taught by truly giving yourself and communicating the love and longing for Christ to those you serve. That's how you're going to communicate it. So don't think about giving a lesson on love. You are the lesson. You are the humility. You are all of it. The lesson of humility cannot be taught by intellectual persuasion, but only by a prolonged and bitter struggle against one's ego. If you want to teach humility, fight your own ego. So where's the lesson coming from? What's the source? It's your fight, your spiritual life, the saint you want to become in the church. And then that fountain filleth. As the psalmist says, my cup runneth over. Right? The cup has to run over. There's no Buddha Mikhail Ibrahim. Some of us cannot forget the messages that went back and forth between this young budding priest in the district of Sporting and an elderly priest in Shobra. The elder would send him the greetings to the younger priest asking his prayers. Oh, and this was last week. But they had a very tight relationship. And so the point I want you to bring, this is when Abu Shakam was young, is that finding this spiritual mentorship is very important. Your connection with God is everything. Right? So finding your own confession father is the key. And again, I should confess because I want the kids to see me confess, because the kids should know that I confess, because what if they ask me, who's your confession father? Then I should have an answer. That's garbage. Right? That's not why we confess. That's not why we go to confession at all. Right? We go to confession because we want to become saints. And so we need to find that source, right? That spiritual father, that elder that guides us, and then that will translate to the kids. Do you know what this icon is?
Can you go to the previous slide?
This one?
Yes, please.
No one is called to serve while in a state of perfection. FYI, none of you are perfect. And I am, but the rest of you know. Nor can there ever be a servant of the Lord, no matter how rich in spiritual gift, who does not need to preserve his heart and mind of a disciple for the rest of his life. So as soon as we move past, past Abuna, past someone above us, then we're in a very dangerous place, right? As soon as I'm a senior servant, I've been serving for 15 years, I'm whatever, then we have a problem, right? As soon as you move past being a disciple, then you have a problem. Who knows what this picture is? It's a very famous story. This picture is at St. Anthony's Monastery. Story of Bulus al-Basit. St. Paul the Simple. He was St. Anthony's disciple. One time there's someone who's demon-possessed, came and they brought him to St. Anthony's, so St. Anthony said, take him to St. Paul. If you've ever been up there to the cave, there's a cave at the top, and then Bulus Basit's cell is on the way up. Halfway, yeah. And so St. Paul, this guy comes down, he says, St. Anthony said, take him out. And he says, I don't know how to do anything. He was a very simple guy. He said, I don't know how to remove a demon or do anything. And they said, well, St. Anthony said, you have to do this. So he took a very hot stone, it's summer, it's hot there, and he put it on his head, okay, which would just start to cook his brain, okay? And he basically said, either I die or this demon comes out of you, because my master, Anthony, said for me to remove this demon, and I have to remove this demon, because he said for me to do it, and so I'm going to do it. And so one of two things happened. Either the demon removes or I die. And the demon, from the humility, immediately left the person. So I like that story. It just shows kids as simple. Moreover, Such a servant must toil every day to discover his deficiencies and flaws. So this is our job as servants, is to discover our own deficiencies and flaws. This doesn't end. And unfortunately, sometimes we think this is a church of kids, a church for kids. This is not a church for kids. This is a church for adults. This is a church. Orthodoxy, Christianity, is a religion for adults. It's not for the kids. You know, every once in a while you talk to someone and say, well, tell me about your confession. Like, well, I mean, I used to confess when I was a teenager. So, khalas, I'm now married, I have kids. Khalas. Khalas.
I'm off the hook.
What does that mean? Like, think of how dangerous a statement that is. Think of what you're saying there. It's shocking. Right? So, this never ends. Right? We don't ever reach a state where, yeah, well, you know, I confessed when I was younger, but khalas. The kids are grown now. So if we're not fighting the fight as servants, then we're not trying to become saints, and then we're quenching the spirit. So a servant must toil every day to discover his deficiencies and flaws. So if you don't see them, then you're not looking. They should be right here. When you look in the mirror, you kind of can't see past them. Right? When we look at ourselves, we should only see weakness. If we don't see weakness, something's wrong. Very wrong. Right? When we look in the mirror, we don't see a beggar, something's wrong. Right? That has to be the only outcome of a true Christian life. He must not be unsettled by the rebukes of the Holy Spirit that comes from the mouths of others. This is very hard for servants. The rebuke of the Holy Spirit will come from the mouths of other people around you. How do you react? Because we can talk about ego all we want and say, oh no, ego, and until someone says something to me. It's like, oh really? Until, you know, I want to set up the spiritual day like this, and they want to set it up like this. We should wear white shirts with blue pants. No, blue shirts with white pants. And just watch everyone fight. Right? And when we get rebuked by someone else in the service, our reaction, that speaks volumes. Did we have to end?
No, it needs to be charged.
Oh, it has to be charged. Finally, he must never discount criticism or advice. I'll just end now.
10%.
You still have 10%.
Okay. We can end there. If we can actually have if you want to have question, answer, discussion, whatever you want. So finally, he must never discount criticism or advice from anyone. This is very hard. What if it comes from a kid? What if it comes from a parent who's a jerk? Who says, you need to do this. This is what's wrong with your class. Now what? You are telling me how to run the class.
Record it when you can.
Listen a second. So our reaction is the window, right? It opens up and tells us what's inside, right? So you can't discount any criticism or advice from anyone, right? There's a very nice story from Saint Anthony. You know the story about Saint Anthony. He hadn't gone to the inner desert yet, and he was still like in the edge of town. And so he's at the watering hole or whatever, the lake or whatever, and this woman walks up, and he's standing there. She starts taking off her clothes. She starts bathing. He's like, so he kind of looks at her. He goes, "What are you doing? I'm a man, and you're just going to take off your clothes in front of me and bathe? Like, احترمي نفسك. And more so, I'm a monk." So you know what she said? This is not a good woman. You know what she said? If you're a monk, what are you doing here? Why don't you go somewhere else? What are you doing in the middle of the city if you're a monk? With attitude. And he said, she's right. God is speaking to me through this sit battala. Is that the right? God is speaking to me through her. She's right. I'm going to go to the inner desert. And that's what took him to the inner desert. So it didn't come from the mouth of a very holy man, you know, the metropolitan, the abuna, the saint, and the... It came from a woman who was whatever. But he was humble enough to hear it. So this is always a good test. You know, he could say, I'm Saint Anthony. Who are you? Okay. We can stop here if anybody has any comments or... I have like 50 more slides, so you can...
We can go for the slides. Yeah.
You don't want to talk?
So-
No, does anyone have any comments?
Yeah. So you said that God has to see the fruit of the service before us.
Mm.
Yani, I couldn't get the point. How? Yani,
No,
how we understand that God gets the fruit before we see the fruit.
No, I said that the servant wants to see the fruit
Yes, that's
before
it.
God.
Yes.
And so the servant is looking for something for themselves. Right? So in the rest of the chapter, it makes it more clear. You know, sometimes you go do a service and there aren't a lot of people there. And you're like, that's a waste. I drove all the way over here for nothing. Right? We did all this service, only 3 kids came. So the servant is looking for something for themselves.
No, but I think that's out of love that we want to see that the kids are growing spiritual, you know.
Of course. But there's a part of me, come in, if I put a lot of effort into something and no one shows up, I'm like, "Khsara, I did all that work for nothing, right? Did I do it for nothing?
For my benefit.
Is one thing forgotten before God? Who did I do it for? In fact, thank God no one showed up, because God is teaching me a lesson, because had a lot of people showed up and all the kids were happy, I said, oh, good, thank God, look at, all the kids are happy, and right? So I would have deceived myself. So sometimes God gives us these lessons and says, you know, why don't you do a lot of work and one kid will show up. Just for you, for your benefit. So that you realize, yeah, I'll tell you a story. There's a priest, once he was in the Orthodox Church, Eastern Orthodox. He was sent to start a church in a community. So they got a building. It's a lot of houses around it, but it's just like, this is modern, last 20 years. So he put up signs, Orthodox Church, and he advertised Bible study Friday night, please come. He prepared a lesson. He spent a lot of time on it. He put out a lot of chairs, thinking somebody would show up. First Friday night comes, no one shows up. Not one person. What does he do? He gives the lesson to no one. Next week, he prepares all week, puts a lot of effort into it, shows up. No one. He gives it again to chairs. And for weeks and months, he would spend a lot of time preparing and working, knowing that maybe no one was going to show up, or maybe one person at best. Why? He was asked by his bishop to start a church here, and he was going to do it faithfully. He is serving God. God saw his efforts. He doesn't care who's there. He doesn't care who's there. Because my service is to God. So, yeah, I know. I mean, we definitely love the kids. But the primary has to be the love of God. The service is for God. God sees what I did. God sees my heart. I mean, it's very dangerous when a service is successful when it's not made out of love. It's not good for the servant. It's dangerous for the servant.
Sometimes you don't see the fruit for whatever reason, and someone else would see the fruit. This was the lesson for first year in my priesthood. The guy, I met him once, maximum 2 times. I got his number, texting me 10:30 p.m. Abuna, are you at church? I want to come and confess. I was there happily. So came. I told him we sit in front of the outside of in the sanctuary. He said no, in the altar. Okay. went in the altar. And I don't remember the confession, this was a long time back, but he was in tears all the time of confession, almost 35 minutes or something, in tears, in tears, in tears, confessing. And I have seen the fruit of someone who has repented. I haven't done zero, I did zero with him. And it was the prayer I knew later on, it was the prayer of his mom and the prayer of many of the family members. So many, many times you do the effort and you don't see the fruit. Buddhists will put the seed, Apollos will water, but God will give the fruit, whether we see it or not. So it was. So I got it as a credit in service. So I saw the fruit of the prayer of people, someone else in the life of this young man, whom I literally did nothing. So as you will know that also when you put the effort for the sake of God, if God is will is to, that we will see the fruit, then this will be a blessing. If we didn't see the fruit, the effort didn't go away because it was for the sake of the love of God.
And even seeing the fruit can be not good for you. Any other question? I got like 30 more slides. I'll show you pictures. It's Abuna Tedros and Abuna Shoy Kamil. Who's that? Abuna Loa and Abuna Tedros. This is Abuna Loa getting ordained. This is Abuna Loa, look at his smile, on the first day of his priesthood when he got ordained, Abuna Shoy Kamil. Very solemn. Who's this? That's Abuna Tunis Hanin when he was still Nabil. Okay, this will be the summary. It is not enough to say prayers, one must be prayer. Prayer incarnate. It is not enough to have moments of praise. All of life, every act, every gesture, even the smile on the human face must become a hymn of adoration and offering a prayer. One should not offer what one has, but what one is. So what we offer is what we are. And the only thing we can offer is to become like Christ. To become the image of Christ. And that's what the kids will see. Glory be to God forever. Thank you all for inviting me, and I know I depressed you. That's what I did.
Thank you.
So is the service a call or invite?
It's a call.
So what's the difference between call and invite?
I don't know what to invite.
Not invite. You ask for that you want to be a servant, or you wait for God's voice that you are calling for a service.
I think the service is a call. It shouldn't be something, but I mean, if you feel called to it, Yani Taban, you can talk to your confession father about it and say, I feel called to service, and if he says yes, then you go and you go to the person responsible and you say, I've talked to my confession father, Yani,
Or
whenever.
invite sometimes, like, because you ask for invite, it's maybe like someone is telling you, oh, can you come and help and so and so and so. So
Mm.
that would be invitation.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think, Yani, if you want to pursue Yani, I think we should all be focused on our repentance and our spiritual lives, and that's it. If there's a calling to service above and beyond that, then it's something we bring up with our confession father, and we ask and we poke, and he'll probably say yes if there's something you're feeling, and then you go and you. I mean, if someone says, can you come help watch the kids today? I mean, that's one thing. But if to become a servant, I think is something you have to discuss with your father in confession. Yeah.
But it's, okay, the verse was saying that whoever loved me, he served me,
Mm-hmm.
right? So sometimes you should seek service because this is the way you show love to God. I mean, I want to practice love with God.
So I agree with that, And I think what's different is what we're calling service. So, if you love me, you'll serve me. It doesn't mean Sunday school. It doesn't mean a deacon. It doesn't mean, it means a million things. It means the guy at work, or the person on the street, or friends. So there's service everywhere. And I think sometimes we limit the service to Sunday school, which yani is a very limited service and not that effective.
Thank you for the
يعني
motivation.
for the new
Thank you for the
contact here.
motivation.
Let's
We're
close
really
the
motivated.
classroom.
And the problem is I'm the Amil Khidmat at our
Very
church, and I'm
optimistic.
always saying, let's just get her to Sunday school.
You are speaking to Sunday school.
Like, it's a
Come
good
on.
solution. No, but yani, I'll be honest, yani, like, if you think about the origin of Sunday school, this was something, it evolved from Pope Shenouda during a time of tremendous lack of knowledge in the church. A lot of ignorance in the priests, and the bishops, and the servants. There are no books published, there's nothing to read, okay? And so Pope Shenouda and this group, they, and Abun Tunish was one of them, and this group, yani, they had very limited resources. They read the resources, they gathered them in a communal library, and then they would go out and teach into places that had never heard anything taught that was correct. Yeah. And so this is kind of the origin of something needed, because there was a lot of ignorance in the home, in the parents, and now the problem isn't ignorance. You know, so forgive me, Annie, but Sunday school is kind of solving the problem of the 1950s in Egypt. You know, where kids don't have, like, we all experience this, right? You go into, we're going to talk about the story of David and Goliath. Half the kids have heard it, half the kids haven't heard it, right? So then you start telling the story. The kids that heard it, they're playing, they're bored, I already know the story, my mom reads it to me. And all the kids, the parents read to them the Bibles at home. So you don't really need to tell the story of David and Goliath. Everyone's read the story of David and Goliath. So I think there's now, the parents can take on more of a role, is what I'm saying. And sometimes, the parents dump on Sunday school, and we think Sunday school is the solution. You know, this half hour a week, where 20 minutes is quieting the kids, that's not teaching, that's not going to teach the kids. And we can't overly rely on it as parents or as servants. We have to make sure the parents, this is a church of adults, for adults. The parents have to be fed, and the parents have to feed. This Sunday school is like, we're putting a patch on a broken wall, that's leaking water. Right? You put a patch on it. You didn't fix it, right? This is just another way to kind of help, but you're not gonna, Christianity doesn't come from the Sunday school teacher. It shouldn't. It should come from the parents. We shouldn't learn about the liturgy from a lesson. We should be standing next to our mom and dad, and the mom and dad explain to them what's happening in the liturgy, right? So, to the degree, and I know you guys have that, understanding your church, and to the degree we can do more things like that, where you teach the parents and have the parents teach, it's better. It's more natural than putting 20 kids in the class, be quiet, and you're, going through the whole thing that we go through. That's why I want to get rid of Sunday school, but we're not going to get rid of it tonight. I can dream, let me dream. So anyway, so service, I think the big service is to each other. As a community, everyone is hurting. Everyone has problems. All of us. And we hide the problems from each other. And we كل واحد حاطط wish everything's great, and oh, my kid's this, and this is going on, and everything's good. And inside, everyone's broken. I think and everyone just goes to Abuna, and as a community, we have to help each other. And this is real service, is loving one another, standing by one another. And kfaya, when someone shares with you something, don't tell anyone else. This is a huge service. That someone can let something out and not worry that you're going to go tell people. How big of a service is that? If you're known in the church as the person who I can come and dump whatever I want on you, and I know you're not going to tell anyone. Phew, that'd be great. One person in the church where we can all call and just say whatever we want to, and get it off our chest, and vent, and get it off our, So there's lots of service that's not Sunday school. But you're right. If we love God, we can't help but serve. It's an automatic reaction. There's no way you cannot.
Another question. I like the principle that okay, when you serve, you don't care about how many people you serve, like 5 or 2 or 3. It's wonderful. But how can we do it here in our churches, honestly? And excuse me that we should start everything. Look, okay, how this church, how many members there, what activity, and with this spiritual competition. Honestly, spiritual competition, I believe this is, has many advantages, but honestly has many disadvantages. And I see people has been got the first place and second place, whatever in some school, and right now youth are atheists. So I'm not sure what we are doing right now. I mean, and this spirit going more and more right now in our churches. It has to be stopped. I mean, I don't know, stuff from Metropolitan, from who, but
This is, I'm not going to talk at all about spiritual competition. And it's above my pay grade. I get paid a lot, but it's not that much. Pope Kyrillos, his favorite psalm was Psalm 24. And there was a part of the psalm that he loved the most. He says, "My eyes are ever on the Lord, for he will release my feet from the trap." My eyes are ever on the Lord. That this has to be our attitude as servants, right? If my eye, when you think about, مثلا, the story of Peter walking on the water, what did Peter do wrong? He took his eyes off God. He looked at the water, he looked at the wind, he looked at the sea, he looked around. He looked at the noise. He looked at the, what's this church doing? What's the spiritual competition? What's it? He looked around. As soon as you look around, you sink. And you sink into the world. The world absorbs you. Okay? And that's his only sin, is he took his eyes off Christ. Right? So, when I was in Egypt this last time, like a few months ago, I met a monk in Dir Marimina. I'll end with this. And he was from Sporting, and he was amazing. He was really amazing. And he said that his spiritual father said, لو حطيت عين على المسيح, if you put one eye on Christ, وعين على الرؤساء, the hierarchy, هتحول. 1 second. But so that's the danger. You put one eye on Christ and one eye on anything else, تحول. Both eyes. خلاص. Then you just do. Once you start looking around, you're going to sink. So, as long as we follow this principle, my eyes are ever on the Lord, the way you get darkness out of a room is you bring light into it. You can't take darkness out. The principle doesn't work. Right? So the only way to solve any problem is you bring light in. Don't even think about the darkness. I met a priest in Seattle. Abuna Lo'asari was his confession father. And he said, when I was a kid, I went to him, I was 9 years old, and I had my list. And I said, here's all the things I did wrong. And Abuna said, la, I don't want to hear it. Tell me about what you did good for Jesus. Tell me about what you did right. Tell me about that. The kid's not used to this approach. He has his list. And Abuna's point was, he's a new kid, and it's like, no, let's not focus on the negative. Lots of negative. It's negative everywhere. If you look, in this room, you're going to find a million negative right now. Okay? Why look? Why take your eyes off Christ? Just stay focused. Lots of waves, lots of wind, lots of thunder. There's lots of darkness. It's always there. You can't avoid it, Then you can meet with Satan about spiritual competition. Okay, I know I have to end soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This way? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and God, amen. Our dearest loving Lord, we thank you for this time, and for this gathering, and for these words, and for the example of the people that you have put in our lives that had their minds and their hearts and their eyes focused on you. forgive us, to focus on our repentance, our returning back to you, and also to focus on being one with you in your Christ. Accept all our prayers, forgive us all our sins, and remember every single one here, remember the church, all the churches, remember the kids, cover our shortcomings, cover our laziness in prayer, cover our sins, and let us, O Lord, count on your hand to cover, and your hand to lift up, and your hand to support, and your hand to work in all of the kids. Through the intercession of Saint Mary and all the choir of saints, hear us when we call upon you. Thank you, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And through Christ Jesus our Lord, thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. We'll have